Right, I think we are live, Michael. So we'll just
We
give
are.
got a ton of people coming in. We'll give them another 60 seconds before we get started.
Yeah, definitely.
It's such a good topic, such a good subject. So I'm not surprised that we've had a huge number of subscriptions, which is great.
No, absolutely. It's going to be massively important these coming months.
And I think, and I'm not giving the game away, but even though the drop has moved and changed into a smear, and it's not happening in May, I think it's even more important that so many people are taking their foot off the gas.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, just a few more seconds. They're pouring in. Okay, where are we? 1 minute past. Okay, so yeah, let's get going. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Welcome to another SEO in a Shed webinar with me, John Earnshaw. As you know, I'm the Chief Product Evangelist at PyData Metrics. I'm going to introduce Michael in a second. The topic for today, Core Web Vitals. And so many people right now in the past couple of weeks have been sighing with relief at the pushback in the knowledge that this is not going to drop in May. But we're kind of here today to say that it's actually more important than ever to understand what all the fuss is about. Not a week goes by. Michael, would you agree? We get an email from somebody normally quite senior saying, are you thinking about Core Web Vitals? You get a lot of that?
So, yeah, absolutely. All the time.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's a lot of that. So we're also here today to gauge just how important it is. Do we need to be worried about it? And finally, and I think most importantly, we're gonna demystify some of the jargon that comes along with it. And today I'm delighted to be joined by none other than the legendary Michael Payne, who I've worked closely with for the past 2 years. Michael, tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you, John. Yeah, so my name is Michael. I'm a senior SEO and search strategy manager at Pi. Been here for 2 years as of tomorrow. It's my anniversary tomorrow. As you can see in the photo, that was pre-lockdown haircut where I looked a little bit like a sheep. But yeah, I've worked in marketing for like 8 years, SEO for about 4 or 5, worked in lots of client-side companies, came across to Pi, and yeah, really excited to be here to talk about Core Web Vitals.
Fantastic. It's great to have you. I thought you were going to change your photo, but you've left it with the old one.
I thought it'd be a talking point. So.
No, I'm just envious of that magnificent head of hair. So yeah, today, 5 sections. What's it all about? And that's where you're going to jump in. First of all, Michael, when's it being rolled out? And this is really interesting because it's not the story that Google's been telling us for the past 6 months. It's all changed. And how significant is that? We're going to look at how performance is actually analyzed, the metrics we used, and that's where we're going to try and demystify some of the jargon. I have taken a look to see how are people performing right now. And it's really important, as it is with search, not just to analyze your performance, but the performance of all the competition as well. And we're going to look at some of the quick wins, the quick ways of improving performance. And this is really about simplifying the landscape and helping you to focus on the metrics and the signals that matter most. So, Michael, okay, let's get going. Shall I move on? Do you want to just tell me when to move on?
Yeah, let's go. Let's get going. So, yeah, if we just...
Do you like this one? I put this one in for you.
It doesn't look like the slides working, John. No, this is exactly what happens on sites that don't load quickly or function correctly. We've all experienced this before. You've gone onto a website to explore what they have on offer, to read content, to possibly buy something, and you experience problems. And what Core Web Vitals is all around is plugging metrics into their algorithm that reward people who do not have an experience like this. And that's
so
really
what it's a good thing, yeah?
It is, of course it is, and we can always see it as it's another thing we need to do, but we can also see it as an optimist and say it's to make sure that our site is giving a good experience to the people coming onto it. So yeah, absolutely a good thing. Absolutely.
100%.
So just to kind of give a context around what John Muller said, so it's a set of real-world, user-centered metrics that quantify aspects of user experience. So we've kind of, the way we see it in a nutshell is it's all about speed, responsiveness, and visual stability of your pages. And I completely agree with John Muller when he says that when you want to tap something on a page and it shifts away, that is super annoying, and that's one of the core metrics here. So John Muller announced this last year, and those metrics are due to start in June. So time is ticking. So in terms of what it looks like, so it's important to remember that these are not the only page experience signals that Google has taken into account. You know, for a long time, there've been these 4 signals below: mobile friendliness, safe browsing, HTTPS, and not having intrusive interstitials or pop-up ads. So these have been part of Google's algorithm for a long, long time. All it is that Google are actually including an additional 3 page experience metrics in that, and they are called the Core Web Vitals. So it's important to understand these are not the only page experience signals that you need to take into account. These are just the new ones that have been brought in. And something for tech geeks as well, we have a link in chat. This gives you a really good breakdown of Core Web Vitals and some of the change logs that are going to go through. So I'll just pop that in. That was something you found, John.
I'm glad you're popping that in, Michael. My ability to operate this chat window is diabolical.
So I think I've put it in chat, but it's only gone to organisers, so maybe someone else will need to do it.
Yeah, somebody in the background will make that work.
Yeah. Thanks, Sophie. There we go. Yeah, so these new metrics are coming in June, and John's now going to take a look at the new metrics, understanding what they are, how they're measured, and what we can do to improve performance.
Exactly, and before I move on to that, I think one point worth mentioning is that Google has stated publicly that it's going to continue to look at experience. So you know, these are just 3 new measures, but others will almost certainly be coming in. So the message is, don't be late to the party. Now, loading. Okay, this is a real bugbear, and there's some great stats here. Look at that one. 53% of visits are abandoned if a mobile site takes longer than 3 seconds to load, and that's phenomenal. And you know what? I was trying this out this morning. I was looking on my iPhone here, and I was searching for men's jeans, and I came across one site. I wasn't going to name and shame, but I will name and shame them later because they actually get a score of 1. It took about 10 seconds. And it was only the brand that was kind of holding me in. But even after a while, I thought, forget that. Let's take a look at some of these numbers. As a page load time goes from 1 to 3 seconds, the probability of a bounce increases by 32%. And that's really phenomenal. And when you look at some of the numbers out there, you know, there are so many websites with content that takes longer than that. Okay, 1 to 5 seconds, the probability of a bounce increases by 90 seconds. And that, again, is really phenomenal. And I was reading recently that Google's actually trained this deep neural network. So it's a bit like a brain. It's a computer system modeled on the brain. And what it did, it actually took a whole bunch of data on abandonment rates and load times and conversion data. And they actually found that as page load time goes from 1 second to 7 seconds, the probability of a mobile visitor bouncing increases by 113%. And at the same time, this amazing deep neural network showed that as the number of elements increased from, say, 400 to 6,000, and you can't see those, the probability of conversion drops by 95%. And Michael, how many times have you heard from a customer or somebody that says, we're on page 1, why aren't we converting? Common question?
Yeah, really common question. And the common answer is that exactly this: the page isn't loading quick enough, so people are bouncing off because they don't want to wait. You know, our expectations of how long a website should take to load in 2021 are insanely pernickety. You know, we want it to be that you literally click and the page is loaded, and that's the expectation today. So these metrics, as severe as they are, these stats, sorry, they don't surprise me, because that is exactly what you expect these days.
Exactly, and that's why I put that quote on there. Faster is better, less is more. How many times have you wanted to run into the design studio where they're putting together this incredible looking website, an absolute triumph of visual performance over speed, and you just want to say, guys, stop. Faster is better, less is more. Just cut that out. And then you'll have somebody in the background, normally somebody very senior, saying, but I want it to look like Apple's website. Isn't that amazing? And then behind the scenes, you've got all this work going on to slow it down. There are so many more figures, but we're not going to go through those right now. Let's talk about how it's measured. Loading. LCP, largest contentful paint. As it says there, this reports on the render time for the largest visible content. And before this measure came along, developers actually found it hard to measure how quickly the main content loaded and was visible to users. And this is a really important metric because it's user-centric. It's about perceived load speed. Do you remember a couple of years ago, we used to talk about FCP, first contentful paint? Where did that go? Okay. The reason why we don't talk about that anymore, because that first contentful paint could actually be an image. It could actually be an image, horrible image saying page loading, okay, a splash screen. And then we talked about first meaningful paint. And nobody understood that. It was far too complicated. But finally, thankfully, we've got this measure, largest contentful paint, that actually really works. And we've got some of the causes for slow loading there. Slow server response times, render blocking JavaScript. We so often see that one. Resource load times, client-side rendering. But you know what? Something that most often causes this is images. Those overly high retina images that the human eye can't even distinguish between that and something of a slightly degraded quality. So it's super important to compress them and use those modern image formats, JPEG 2000, XR, WebP, etc. So the targets we're looking for, less than 2.5 seconds. If you're between 2.5 and 4, you need improvement. Over 4, then your performance is poor. And I'll give you some numbers in a bit, but this is an image we're probably all familiar with from some of those Lighthouse performance reports. And I was looking yesterday at websites, fashion websites, and this is it's a film strip. Well, I call it a film strip. Do you call it a film strip? What do people call this thing, Michael?
That's what I've always called it. That's what it looks like.
Exactly. And basically here, white is bad because that's all the time that the user is searching for something and looking at this white screen. Okay, that top one, matches fashion, 3.2 seconds. Okay, I saw it first. That second one, the chances are you probably didn't see it first because that takes 4.8 seconds to load. That one, told you about this one yesterday, waiting forever, Alexa Chung, 9.3 seconds. There's far too much. And how do you identify the image that's causing this? Well, you can see it in DevTools, okay? So you can actually see that in the trace, and you can also see it in the Lighthouse report, wonderfully simply under largest contentful paint. So as far as loading goes, and when you get those reports and you'll see a whole bunch of things, most of it's incomprehensible to perhaps somebody who's not a coder, can actually be really simple, and it often boils down to 3 things: optimizing images, deferring that non-critical script and CSS to later on, and also speeding up server response times. Now, we're not techies, we're not dev, but what we're hoping to do, Michael, you and I, in this webinar, is really make it easy to communicate with the people who will do the dev work that will solve these problems. And that image on the right there about seeing the smiley face above the fold, that's employing a technique using critical CSS. And this is where we're extracting the CSS for above the fold content to render that as quickly as possible and doing the rest later. And I think in dev circles, that's actually quite a common thing. And it's so often ignored. Loading. incredibly frustrating. And I think this is actually weighted about 25% when it comes to all of those metrics that we're looking at today. So it's super important. Whoa, a bit heavy on the click there. Okay.
Gone too far.
Yeah, that was way too fast. Now, so the second thing that we're looking at is interactivity. Michael, does that image mean anything to you?
It doesn't, no. I know you mentioned it to me this morning, but I have never seen boo.com. Well, I'm sure there will be some people on the call who have.
Only people of a certain age. So anyone of sort of my age group, that's like early 30s upwards. Now, what's interactivity all about? You know, how long does it take before you can actually interact with a web page? Okay, sometimes you just want to tap on a button and you're tapping ferociously. You want to, you know, add to a basket, and any delays in actually clicking can be super frustrating. And when it comes down to a page, first impressions are so important. And I think we were talking earlier, Michael, about and boo.com is a site that was developed around 2000, around the start of the first .com boom. And they made this site that looked amazing. And it had an assistant who was called Boo, and you can see her there. And her job was to help you choose something to wear. And she would actually go and try items of clothing on. I think it was built in Flash. It looked amazing, but it took about 15 minutes before you could actually click on anything. So I think the conversation we had, no matter how amazing something is, you soon forget looks when you can't interact with a page. You agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. We were talking about different reasons why someone would like a website. For me, very functional as an SEO. I want a website to work. I want it to be really easy to get to and fro. I want it to be clearly marked where I need to go. I want it to be fast, and I want it to do its job. But somebody like my partner, Olive, absolutely wants the website to look really nice. She wants it to be really, you know, nice colors and just look really well put together. And we always have that balance between SEO and design and UX, and the three have to come together to make sure, and this is exactly why we're here, we're to make sure we don't want to step on design's toes or UX, we don't want to cause conflicts, but we want to make sure that our site is optimized for search so that people actually come through to it through that mechanism, and then they can enjoy the site as it looks. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah, exactly. And what you said there echoes research that Google has actually done on what do people think is the most important factor when it comes to looking at a page. And right on top, I think it's 74%. I've got the number somewhere. It's you know, it's loading and it's interactivity. When it comes to what the site looks like, it's down at about 30%. So Olive is in a minority there. So it's actually quite difficult to measure how much people like your design without actually using some serious tech to do that, or in fact asking them. But responsiveness and interactivity can be measured. And we use this measure called first input delay. As it says there, measures a user's first impression of your site's interactivity and responsiveness. And it's actually a measurement, the time it takes for a browser to respond to the visitor's first interaction. So I'm clicking on something, how long does it take? And Lighthouse DevTools, they're really great for identifying these issues. And some of the causes there are things like long tasks going on in the background, heavy JavaScript execution. JavaScript's responsible for a lot of things. I mean, it's great, but it's responsible for so much. Talk about tree shaking in a bit. Large JavaScript bundles. Okay, so, and these delays often happen, you know, when the main browser is busy doing something else, so it can't respond to the actual user. And often it's a case, Michael, of just breaking things up and serving the user what they want when they need it. Make sense?
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think, oh, go on,
Go on.
I was going to say it's a really common misconception that first input delay is how long it takes for the page to become interactive, but it absolutely is not. That is first time to interactive. This is all around when you click something, how long it takes to load. So it's completely separate to how long the page takes to become interactive. Just to clarify, because I know there's been, certainly with the clients I've spoken to, there's been a little bit of confusion around the two coming together. And if it was that it was, you had to get under 100 milliseconds for the time for your page to become interactive, that would be pretty much impossible. So yeah, it is not that, it is how long it takes for the browser to respond when you've clicked something.
Yeah, that's such a good shout. And first input delay, it's also one of those measures that needs users to be calculated, so it can only be tested in the field, because a lot of these measures you have to distinguish between lab and field. Whereas if you want to measure something in the lab that's equivalent, then we use time to interactive. JavaScript bundles. Okay, I'm probably going to talk about tree shaking in a moment. So speeding up that first input delay. Okay, reduce the impact of third-party code, and that's advertising, social media, A/B testing, analytics, and you always need to add third-party code for that sort of thing. And Lighthouse in this screenshot here does a really great job at actually identifying pages that have third-party code where the block is actually 250 milliseconds or longer. So simple stuff that you can do. Remove it if it doesn't add value, and optimize the loading process. JavaScript, time and time again, and Lighthouse shows a warning when JavaScript execution takes more than 2 seconds. And again, we're given all this information by Lighthouse, and when it's longer than 3.5 seconds, the audit fails. And I remember encountering a site once where it actually took, I think, 16 seconds to fully load and be interactive. Immensely frustrating. So we looked at it, and there was an awful lot of JavaScript. And I remember talking to the developer, and I said, is there anything we can do about this? And he looked at it, he went away, and he came back and he said, well, we can do some tree shaking. I said, what's tree shaking? He said, well, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here in bundles that we're not actually using. I said, well, you want to go and have a shake of that tree? So he went away, did this tree shaking, came back and reduced it down by about 50%. And so often that's the case of just, not really thinking about the user when it comes to this sort of thing. Minimizing main thread, and a main thread, the primary element of a browser's user experience. And this is sort of passing HTML, CSS, and turning it into something visual. Okay, and while that's happening, it can't actually handle user requests. The final thing we can do is keep those request counts small. And while this might not make any sense to a chief marketing officer, all of these things are relatively straightforward, and are going to make a huge amount of sense to a coder. Wouldn't you agree, Michael?
Oh, definitely, yeah. This is exactly the sort of stuff that they can go away and find all sorts to sort. This is really their bread and butter. And when I like the term tree shaking, I hadn't heard that before. You told me it the other day. Really like that. But I guess it's a symptom, isn't it, that when developers are constantly making site updates, sometimes unused code just gets left there. It just gets lost and forgotten about because it's been moved on from. I guess it's almost unavoidable in a way, to an extent. There's always going to be this. So if we're looking to constantly monitor the site and make it as optimized as possible, we should always be looking to shake the trees to just make sure any projects we push through remove the code that's no longer needed.
100%, and there's always something there. Google just hasn't randomly come up with these numbers and these measures. There is a reason for them. Okay, so on to the third of these core web vitals, and this is visual stability. Okay, unstable layout, immensely frustrating. There's nothing worse than looking at a page and the stuff's moving around. And I talked to you about looking for recipes. I'm always looking for recipes. And for some reason, this always happens on recipe sites. And I'm scrolling, and I'm looking for a recipe for, I don't know, the best way to make carbonara or something like that. And I'm looking for the ingredients, and the bloody things move. The box moves down the page, or it moves up. So a real huge problem. And ads are so often to blame, okay? And in this example here, this screenshot, that's why you see these gray boxes, because that's a static reservation of space for an ad. It's defined by this container. Okay. And in this case, it looks like the height setting, has been preset. It looks ugly, but, it's going to make the page work. So how do we measure visual stability? Well, cumulative layout shift. And again, it's more jargon to throw around at the summer party. And what this does, it sums shift scores across layout shifts that don't occur within 500 milliseconds of a user input. And it looks at both how much content shifts, like a block shifts, as well as the distance the elements were shifted. And you actually looked into how this is calculated, Michael. Can you remember? Can you explain?
Yeah, I can. It was probably the least exciting 30 minutes of my week so far, but so prepare yourself for a bumpy ride, guys.
I liked it.
It's a formula-driven metric, and the way that it's calculated is by something called impact fraction multiplied by distance fraction. So if we just take on the screen right now, you can see on the right side, there's the CLS block there. Let's pretend that's a square. That's probably taking up around, I don't know, 30% of the page, let's say. So if that moved, let's say 20% to the left, the impact fraction is how much that entire thing has taken up. So it's its original starting point plus all the space it takes up alongside that. So let's say that became 50%, because that's a nice round number that I can work with. So the impact fraction is 0.5. The distance fraction is then how much it moved. So if the distance fraction, let's use another nice easy one. Let's say the distance fraction is 0.5. Then your cumulative layout shift would be the impact fraction of 0.5 times the distance fraction of 0.5, which I believe would be 0.25, if my maths is correct.
I think you are correct.
So therefore, you would be in between needs improvement and poor. So yeah, impact is the whole area that's impacted by this shift. The distance is how much it moves across the page. Well, not in fact, it's not on the page, of the viewport. And that is how it's calculated. Super fun metric, but basically make it that when your page loads, everything stays in its correct place and does not load in the wrong place and then move.
That's such a great explanation, and I loved it when I heard it earlier. So thank you for being the first person who can actually explain that variable to me, Michael. So what causes this? Ads. Yeah, ads are a problem. Love them or hate them, we need them. But when they're thrown in afterwards and push everything else down, or even when you have a placeholder, there is no ad, then the placeholder collapses. That's just as frustrating as having the ad inserted. Yeah, images, embeds, dynamically injected content, unstyled filter widgets. How many times, are we not sorting out that widget on the back end, and we're actually doing that client side and still waiting for that to readjust and suddenly spring into place? Immensely frustrating. Okay, so to improve your score, okay, images, always include those attributes that define the size. Okay, super important. Or, as a lot of fashion designers do, reserve that required space, with a box that's actually a similar color to what's going to be pushed into it. Ads best practices out there, static reservation. I mentioned don't collapse it, and choose the most appropriate size for the ad as well. Dynamic content, just don't shove it in there above new content without some sort of space reservation. Immensely frustrating. And I put the example there for pizza dough. Wasn't this page, but just an immensely frustrating time on the weekend as I was thinking about this webinar, just trying to follow stuff that was moving around my screen. It's horrible. Michael, we're on to the juicy stuff. Okay, we've looked at those scores. When's it being rolled out? What can we expect?
So it was originally scheduled for May last year, and it's actually quite unheard of for Google to announce something so much in advance. I think the last time that they did that was Mobilegeddon, which was many years ago. So it's very unlikely. I've just seen that you've put 2001, John. It wasn't scheduled for May 2001. It was scheduled for May 2021, not 20 years ago.
What's a few years? What's a few years?
Yeah. But yeah, so they originally planned it for May. It has now been confirmed that that initial rollout has been changed. It's now going to go between mid-June and August. It's going to be a gradual rollout, so it's smeared across 3 months. So we actually think this could be potentially more dangerous, because especially as SEOs, if we're trying to report on this and we're trying to explain to people that this is something that we're being hit by, if our visibility or our share of voice in the market is just kind of gradually going down, it could be attributed to a number of other factors. And then what's going to happen is we're potentially going to get to October, and if nothing's going to be done, it's going to be like, oh, our visibility has dropped so much over the last 3 months, and it's going to be a symptom of this. So we think this is actually quite dangerous. We also feel that this may pave the way for an algorithm update in May. May happens to be the month that Google has done its most algorithm updates over the last 10 years. May is one of their primary months for it. And we feel that maybe the reason that they've chosen to do this from June onwards as a gradual rollout is to make way for an algorithm update in May. Don't know how you feel about that, John, but that's certainly my impression.
I agree on both counts, Michael. May the 2nd, I think, was last year's broad core update. It's due. We could say it's overdue, and I love that term smearing, because with a core update, you go in and you see a drop, and everyone panics and invests money in fixing it. When you go in every single day over 3 months and you don't see much happening, there's a tendency to say, oh, no great disaster, just lost 0.003 of our visibility. Come to October and I look back and I say, hey, we've lost 10 index points. That's a disaster. So
yeah, absolutely. And just on that as well, I was just going to say, there's also the fact that they're tying this in with the AMP badge disappearing, so that top stories within Google is now available to all content. So this makes sense for the two to be tied together. AMP was always, in my opinion, a little bit of a stopgap to make it so the fastest articles were available in top stories. Now it's going to be, if you're hitting all your Core Web Vitals targets, then absolutely your news articles are going to be eligible to be in that top story. So AMP is kind of negated by this. And it completely makes sense. I mean, I don't know how many people here have worked with AMP, but it's so complicated. The configuration's really difficult, and there's so much risk of internal conflicts across your site. I welcome this as a much better, more secure way for us and for Google to make sure that the fastest content is surfacing. Absolutely.
I agree with you on that.
So
you're going to tell us about analyzing performance.
I am, yeah. So in terms of how you can analyze your performance, there's a number of tools already available for this. If you just click on to the next slide, the first place, as with so many of these things, is Search Console. So they incorporated the report in Search Console for Core Web Vitals. For the people who haven't been in and seen it, if you just head into your Search Console, you'll see in the left nav, there's a Core Web Vitals function. Within that, it will give you a mobile and desktop view, and it will show you per row how many of your URLs are good, needs improvement, or poor based on your site. And obviously, the more red, the worse it's going to be. The more green, the better it's going to be. So that's the first place. And if you're wanting to look at kind of a broad view, that's probably where you want to get started. Now, good click there, that was perfectly timed. If you're looking for a more granular view, you're wanting to analyze some of your core pages, trying to understand what some of the common problems are, we think a good place to start is PageSpeed Insights. So what that allows you to do is you'll put a URL in, and it will give you, alongside many other speed metrics, it will give you your Core Web Vitals score for that particular page. It's pretty useful. It gives you a good idea of what kind of things are causing problems within that particular page. And if you use it for multiple pages, you can then build a picture across page types of what are the kind of common recurring problems. If you're a commercial company, you might want to have your category pages, subcategories, product pages, navigation pages, maybe your blog pages. Put a few of each in there, you'll get a really good idea of what's causing you to not hit those targets. So that's a really, really good place to go. I think we've got on the next slide, we've got a few yeah, just some details here of the kind of things that it will show. So it will give you the things that you've passed, what your opportunities are, and then a bit more diagnostics around some wider problems. And I mean, if you send a dev in here and they have a look at this and their goal is to get a top score in page speed, then they're going to absolutely lap this up. You know, there's a lot of information in here, really, really useful. Yeah, and so page speed actually pulls some of its data from another open source tool called Lighthouse. And Lighthouse is something that when it pulls it through, it gives you a score out of 100 for each of them. And that score is a balanced representation of user perceived performance. So the way that it calculates this is based on user perceptions. So this is kind of a bit of a, I would say, page speed is probably quite quantitative, and then this is a little bit qualitative because it requires a human touch to it. But I think that's really useful because as much as Google is this all-powerful machine learning, artificial intelligence, there are some things that it just cannot do. Take EAT, for example. You know, Google cannot understand the quality of pages without human intervention. And I think sometimes when you're wanting to talk about page speed, you need that little bit of a human touch to it as well. So you plug your tool into it, and it will give you a score out of 100 for each metric. Really, really useful to get much more detailed analysis. If you just go on to the next slide, John, this slide's really good. So this gives you an idea of how it calculates your Lighthouse score out of 100, and it weights the metrics based on what's most important. So if you look on the page now, you can see that largest contentful paint is actually the most valuable, and that matches the Core Web Vitals metrics. You can also see that cumulative layout shift in this case is a lot lower, but that does seem to be the way it is with Core Web Vitals as well. So really, really useful for that. And in terms of, and I'll put links through to all of these tools in the chat momentarily, but in terms of other tools out there, there's a really good tool that I tend to use, which is webpagetest.org, which gives you super, super detailed coding advice for page level as well. So that's really, really useful. But there's a lot out there that can help. You know, this isn't one of those situations where Google's going, you need to do this, and everyone's scrambling around like, what do we do? I don't know where we're supposed to go. There's loads of tools already out there, some of which are Google owned, some of which are not, which you can use to give you a really good indication. So, you know, hopefully if you've come to this webinar and you didn't understand before, you understand a little bit more about what Core Web Vitals are, and now you can go into some of these tools and start to look at what exactly you could do to start improving your performance before June comes around.
Yeah, absolutely. Before the entire summer comes around. And I love this one as well, this calculator, and it really does help. You don't need to understand what tree shaking is, but you need to understand that there are solutions when your content is in the red, okay? You know, when your page isn't performing as well as it might. So in terms of how top sites are doing right now, there have been plenty of studies out there, and Google's got a page speed API, and we'll try and drop that in. Michael, if you can drop that into the chat as well. And that's a really great way of analyzing the landscape en masse. But what I've been doing this week really is taking, you know, in the fashion web space, some of the top performers for a bunch of search terms and ask the question, well, who's doing it really well? The great news, if you've only just woken up and heard about Core Web Vitals, is no one's doing it really well, okay? I see poor scores across the board, and I love these charts. This was one retailer, and this was for women's wear, you know, was the only one that actually passed across the range of terms. And these charts are great. So you know, what does that mean? When it comes to largest contentful paint, okay, 92% of the events were actually in the green or got a great score, 90 to 100. 6% needed work and only 2% were bad. Okay, so super great charts to work with. I mentioned this morning, I was looking at a site, should we call them out? Yeah, okay, it was Levi. I thought, why is this taking so long just to do anything? So I ran them through the same tool, and I get a score of 1. Not often you see a score of 1. That's an absolute cracker. Okay, you know, when it comes to largest contentful paint, how long does it take to load? Okay, only 4% of loads are done in less than 2.5 seconds. 74% of loads are actually taking more than 4 seconds. And you can see there in the film strip, we got a lot of white space up front. And then for some reason, despite searching from the UK, I'm actually served up with a piece of French content. I can't speak French, that's no good to me. So that adds frustration on frustration. Michael, let's reach out to Levi, see if we can offer them some help.
Yeah.
So in terms of where things stand now, here we've got a share of voice table here within fashion. This is from one of our reports that that you can get from our website. So if you want to know how you stack up in your vertical against all your competitors, simply go to the website and you can see that. So here are the top 20 fashion retailers across 5 different categories: accessories, kidswear, menswear, non-gender, women's wear. What we're going to be doing is analyzing the performance of all of these over the coming months. And we're going to be monitoring things very closely, eliminating broad core updates. There will be one at some stage soon. We'll eliminate that. We'll eliminate basic migratory disasters. And there is at least one site in this list, okay, are they there? They must be there. Yeah, they are there. That's had an absolute catastrophe of a migration in the past 3 weeks. There's a prize if anyone can guess who it is. Just drop that in the chat or messages afterwards. I'll find a prize from my shed somewhere. It's an absolute horror story. But importantly, we're going to be getting rid of everything else and saying, okay, who's actually winning when it comes to Web Vitals as they roll out, who's losing, and at the end of the summer, we'll be able to do a full report on that. So we're running short on time. Quickest ways of improving performance of all the metrics and the things that you can get. What's worked for us? Compressing images and text, okay? Easy to do, big savings. You can save up to 30%, okay? You know, of space on a typical page, including size attributes, minification, okay? When you see JavaScript, it's actually really spread out. You can get rid of the gaps, you can pack all this stuff together, you can get rid of the comments, you can reduce script size by up to 60%, and every CMS has a tool available that will allow you to do this, and there's no excuse for not doing that these days. You know, including size parameters, reserving space for those as prioritizing the above the fold content, using critical CSS, and don't insert new content above existing. And again, that's down to ads. Lighthouse will identify those elements that contribute to that cumulative layout shift. So you can take your guidance from that tool. But in terms of summary, in terms of where we've got to, and I think virtually everybody's still here, Michael. It's obviously a subject that's close to people's hearts. In terms of summary, really important. Michael, you mentioned it. Core Web Vitals does not override great content, okay? So do not forget about EAT. There was a lot of talk about EAT, expertise, authority, and trust, and we've got some webinars and some stuff on the site all about that. That is so important. You know, you cannot get scores close to 0 for those 3 Web Vitals and think you can get away without having quality content or demonstrating that your content is written by expertise, that your content is authoritative, and that you have trust as well. That's so important. Worth emphasizing, Michael?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The last thing we'd want from this webinar is somebody to go away and go, right, we're going to strip away all the images, all the content, and make all the site as quickly as possible. Because then people are going to come on the site and think this site looks really plain and dry. So we don't need that. We need to find ways to come together and make that content and images work for us and be as quick as possible. And there are ways to do it. It's just a case of identifying where the issues are and focusing on optimizing rather than removing.
Exactly, and you mentioned it, those quality raters who are analyzing websites, who are checking that the signals are being interpreted correctly, are continually feeding back. We can expect to see their feedback in the form of the next core update, which is probably going to happen. You'll put money on it, I'll put money on it. It's going to happen before June. You heard it here first. Okay, you heard it here first. We almost got the 3 right last year. Okay, use Core Web Vitals in Search Console for the big picture. Identify the percentage of terms in poor, needs work, and good. Get down to the details with Lighthouse and get started on the improvements now. Debug, improve and confirm using the lab testing. That's so important. Update the production, push out marked as fixed in Search Console, and then you can validate after some time with that field data. That takes a little bit of time. And above all, monitor improvement over time. Anything you want to add, Michael?
Yeah, I think these are really good takeaways. I just kind of want to reiterate that it's really important that we don't see these extra metrics being added in as a bad thing, because it's so easy to fall down the trap of saying there's more that we need to do, more that we need to do to make sure we get search traffic. But it's just making sure that the website is a great experience for users and that search engines can pick that up. And realistically, I think once you get started and you start identifying it, if your developers can apply some kind of regex to the website to try and bulk remove things, I think the changes will come quite quickly, and it's going to be really important. We think that this mashed with another update and also the AMP removal for top stories, we think they're largely going to shape the search landscape towards the end of the year, and it's going to make a massive difference. And I think the people who ignore this or don't hit the targets are unfortunately going to possibly, dependent on the level of competition in their market, they could possibly experience some drops in visibility and traffic. And those who make themselves accounted for and start making these changes, and even if you just manage to get yourself from red to orange, it's an improvement. The sites that manage to do that are going to reap the rewards as the year goes on. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Don't wait till October to look back and see attrition in terms of visibility that could not be picked up on a daily basis. And this time last year we were talking about the level playing field where everyone's got their tech sorted. So EAT was the next thing, the next way to make a difference. As you're starting to take care of EAT, we've now got Core Web Vitals. So interactivity, loading, visual stability, those are 3 areas to think about. They're not complicated. Fixing some of the issues might be complex to us, but they are not complex to developers. And if anything, we hope that we've given you the language and the toolkit to be able to understand if you're in a good position, if you're in a needs improvement position, or if you're in a pretty bad position right now. There is still time to get this sorted. And talking of time, I think we're out of time. So just want to say thanks to everybody for tuning in. As always, it's been a huge turnout today. And thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for having me.
We'll get you back on soon. And if anybody does have questions about their performance for Core Web Vitals, then do reach out to us. We've purposely avoided going into too much technical detail, but if there is a demand for technical detail and some further understanding of the implementation of this, then again, please feel free to reach out. So without further ado, thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you guys. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Michael. See you later.